just wanted to kind of frame some of the current needs that we have. We do have quite a few projects that our departments have proposed for transformative and equitable uses of these funding dollars that have come from the federal government in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are a variety of ways that you can put these funds to good use. I will remind you that you do not have a deadline for allocating these funds. We have set those aside through a grant project ordinance to be used in the future whenever you decide that you would like to make those specific allocations. But I did want to put all of this on the table again for you today so that you can consider the needs that are out there, the possible projects, talk about whether you would like to allocate some of that $4.4 million that we have currently available towards any of these uses, or if you would like to designate some of it in a reserve for specific purposes so that we can continue conversations around the remaining amount as we move forward. Also keep in mind, whatever you do reserve, if that is not spent for that specific purpose in the future, then it can go back into the pot for reallocation to a different purpose. So I would welcome any questions that you have about any of these projects this morning, and request that the board have some discussion as far as whether or not you would like to move forward with any of these projects or designate some of the ARP funding for any of these purposes to hold in reserve.
Manager Kathy, appreciate your explanation and clarity there. And for all those in our departments that submitted their project recommendations, I appreciate your efforts there. I know it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to come up with those recommendations, and you did a good job as far as departmentally putting those together and putting those in the packet for consideration. And I think if we look at those individually, we could say that they all have merit, they all have value. And if you department heads had not submitted any requests, that would cause me more questions than I have this way. So again, appreciate that very much. But the real challenge with this board and going forward is how do we most effectively select projects that best utilize those funds here in the county. And my opinion is the goal of the board should be to apply the funds in the areas that benefit the county the most or the best going forward and have the most long-term benefits. So those are just a couple of thoughts. I don't know if other members like to express or have comments related to ARP funding.
Chairman Powell,
Yes, sir.
all of these projects are worthy projects. However, by my assertion and opinion, we need to use this money in the most critical areas for the entire county, where we deem these most critical areas would be. That's my assumption.
Any other board members? Comments?
Mr. Chairman, the whole point of the ARP monies was for what purpose? To buffer what we lost during a pandemic, to replace what we lost, or potentially what we lost?
There were a number of purposes behind the ARP funding. Revenue replacement is one of those. As a government, we did not actually suffer the revenue losses that would have enabled us to use it for that purpose, but the provisions, the federal government ended up saying we could take a standard deduction. So in effect, all governments could claim up to $10 million of revenue replacement and use the funding for general government services, which is what we chose to do. But they were also, the funding, the spirit behind the funding was to either make up for losses, it was to enhance public health preparedness moving forward. There were specific projects aimed at infrastructure improvements, such as broadband and utilities. Many governments are using it in that category. And also with a focus on transformational projects that would really have an impact within our communities. Just in the spirit of recovery and resilience and moving forward together. So that was some of the general purposes behind the ARP.
So how, if we didn't have this money, and we had this same wish list of projects, how might we approach that if we didn't have this extra funding, this pile of money that just landed on us because it's a nice thing?
There are a variety of different avenues that we would pursue. Some of these would get worked into our CIP in future years, and we could pursue grant funding to leverage some of our general funds for these purposes. So we would be building funding into the general fund expenditures for these purposes and having some grant funds to supplement that. Those would be the main funding sources that we would be pursuing.
So is there a way to look at which projects would move most expeditiously through the normal channels versus the ones that would take more time and effort, to kind of separate those out and put those in the normal track, and then have the remaining projects that would, say, take longer or maybe not be as expediently, or wouldn't get funding, grant funding? If we didn't have this money, we still want to do these things, how would we do it? What's the fastest way to get the funding or to get the projects done? Next year, 2 years, whatever, and then, try to split those out and see which ones would go through the normal channels just as fast and efficiently versus those that wouldn't, and then maybe that would help us narrow down what we would fund now. Am I making any sense?
You are making sense.
Okay.
I would say that exercise may be a bit challenging. There is a sense of being able to proceed with some immediacy if we use the ARP funding. I think with any of these other projects, we are looking at a longer horizon for building them into our long-term plans. Some of them might make it into the first year, some might make it into the second year, some might make it into the third year, and determining where we could get some revenues to help support those projects. Certainly, there's quite a bit of grant funding available out there for parks projects, so we would have to just work to apply for that grant funding. There's grants available to support animal services, so we might be able to get some towards those projects. The other main project is with emergency services, the community risk reduction program. There's some potential funding sources for that as well. So all of these, it would not be a matter of identifying something to fund them 100%, but we could work on incorporating them into long-term plans if they do have, if the board sees fit and seeking funding for those.
So if a lot of them have funding, grant funding opportunities, then we could fund part of it with the caveat that we're anticipating. I mean, you don't have to fund the request 100%, do we? These are just the requests or the costs, but we can say, well, we can divvy up so much money if we know that there's grant money that could be matched for that project or added to. Like, when I look at Parks and Recreation, I love the splash pad idea. I think that's just a really interesting and neat thing that would be beneficial. But then I look at the overall parks improvements, and those things would have to happen going on. That would be an ongoing process anyway. So we would be doing that in the future years. It would just be nice to have it all done now, but maybe we can't do it all now. Maybe we can only fund part of it, and they have to finish up the rest with other grant monies or other budget monies. So is it possible to divide the money, not giving them the whole wish list, but dividing the funds up for a lesser amount?
That is possible. You could choose to allocate X
And
amount of
whatever,
ARP
okay.
funding towards a certain project. We can determine, the scope of the project within that funding amount, plus any additional revenues that we could try to generate to supplement that, to determine if we could cover the full project as proposed, or if there is something that would need to be amended with the project in order to keep it to a certain dollar amount.
Very good, and I appreciate your comments there. This is, as time goes on, it's kind of a ever-changing landscape, so to speak, and I think thus far this board has approached the use of the ARP funding in a very conservative and thoughtful manner, thoughtful related to priorities in the county such as broadband and some others that are extremely important. They were sort of easy to approve and move forward with. At the same time, we need to be cognizant of the remaining funds that are available to the county, and as you pointed out, there are no timelines here, so there's no real pressure to make a decision here. And in light of what you just said about the pending and possibility of grants related to the Parks and Rec Department, that should be considered. Of course, if there are grants available there, we certainly want to take advantage of those. Again, there's no sense of urgency here, and that takes the pressure away from us as board members to make any quick decisions here without a lot of due diligence and thoughtfulness as we go forward. So we're very flexible. At this point, we can do nothing, or we could make another decision. So again, it's sort of up to the board. I've got a thought, but I'll hear from others.
Mr. Chair, I just, when we look at the numbers, we have 4,441,121 to deal with, and yet we look at what projects are going to be, and you're looking at 6,505,907. So there's obviously we don't, it'd be great if you had $6 million, $7 million right now that you could say, okay, we can do it all, which we can't. I also like the suggestion and the ideas about pursuing grants. I think, if we don't commit this money, we have this money here available, and we go out and get a grant, and maybe it's a matching grant, then maybe we can pull from these funds to support that matching grant. And then again, instead of it costing, $750,000, $350, right? Something like that. Stretches the budget and the money that we have here out. So, as we said, it's not like we have to rush on this, but we certainly can pursue some of our other options so that maybe we get some of this grant money and can help some of these projects, and we can pull that from this fund if we need to.
And while we wait for that process, the money sits and collects interest for the county as
Yeah.
well, which is not a bad thing.
And I'm not saying no to anything other than I'm saying, if we've got opportunities to apply for grants, let's apply for the grants and let's see what we can get. And then let's see where we're at then. We never know what the future's gonna hold, so.
Would that throw a challenge out to the different departments, like go out and get the grant money and we'll match it? Would that be a challenge to the team?
Well, it does. It does create some additional legwork as far as pulling these off, but it slows the process down a bit, but it certainly provides a way for us to leverage these dollars to a greater degree. And as I said, we can work in these projects to the longer-term plans rather than trying to tackle them right off the bat.
As the discussion goes on, you know, these are interesting comments and thoughts, and I certainly appreciate those, and that's the objective way we should look at that. Another thing, I think we're all interested in economic development and growth moving forward. Hearing what I'm hearing, and I'm going to make a motion rather than a suggestion, so a motion we can talk about. I would like to make a motion to set aside $2 million of the $2.4 million that's available in a economic development catalyst fund for a pending project, and then the remaining 2.44 there for consideration later or at a later date. So I'll make that motion. So we're open for discussion on a motion.
I have just a question on that.
Sorry.
Is that we mentioned earlier that, let's say if we put the $2 million towards economic development, we don't use it for the year, or whatever the time frame is, it goes back into the general fund, or goes back to be spent later. Is that correct or no?
What we could do is, within the ARP project, we could designate $2 million, as we have for broadband, towards economic development. And in the event that the board decides to move forward with allocating that for a specific purpose, then we could move that into the Economic Catalyst Fund or wherever it would need to go in order to cover that expenditure.
But if it's put into the economic catalyst fund, then it's there. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be
True,
strictly
yes.
used for economic
Mhm.
development. Just wanted to clarify that.
Mhm.
So, okay.
And this is in addition to any other incentives that we give as far as tax incentives and whatnot. So this could be significant.
Any further comments, thoughts? Hearing none. Have a motion on the floor. Do we need to repeat that? Okay, we're all clear. All in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
None. Okay. Got that one recorded?
Yes, 4-1.
Okay. All right. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn then? Were there any other comments related to ARP? Still leave that.
Mr. Chair's question, what is our plan for the remaining balance?
To be addressed.
2.4?
To be considered at a later date?
Do we have to make a motion on that, or do we just,
You don't have to,
okay?
so. Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
All right.
Aye. Opposed, none, motion carried. Thank you.